Like many people, it seems, I have been thoroughly obsessed with Arc Raiders over the first weekend since it launched, and I am having a blast with the game. But one of the things that drew me into the extraction genre, as funny as this may seem, was its potential for telling interesting narratives. I think that there's something very interesting about having a dynamic multiplayer experience that's attached to a world that you discover and uncover facts about through engaging with the extraction system. So when I was coming over to play Ark and look more into it over the past year or so, I was involved in what I think was the first tech test back in last August or something like that. One of the things that I was trying to key in on and understand was the world that they were building and the story that they were trying to tell. And over that time, I kind of shifted a little bit of my focus towards the finals, which was Embark's last game, or maybe the first game that they did as well, and looked at the story that they were telling there because I had seen a few interesting things, both from people within the community who have told me to check it out and see how they're telling that story, and by finding people on YouTube like Rockhound Black who was covering the Easter eggs and other interesting tidbits from the finals and the little voice lines that tell the overarching story. And I think that the presentation in the finals was very cool, but the actual story that they were telling about the meat space, and then you have the announcers, and they were used to, compete in the games, or at least the guy did. The details are a little fuzzy. I just didn't find that I really connected with that story. And so coming into Arc Raiders, I was kind of under the impression that Embark wasn't really going to deliver a narrative experience that was going to like satisfy me, but also that's not exactly what I was looking for. Regardless, as someone who's kind of obsessed with yapping about science fiction stories, when I started playing Arc Raiders, I was still trying to kind of uncover what this world is about and see what the larger kind of overarching themes are and see if it's something interesting. And I am delighted to say that I have found something that has piqued my interest. I do think that it could be going somewhere that's very interesting. So I wanted to talk about my early thoughts on the story of Arc Raiders and just share my personal experience with it. I have not completed all of the quests. I think I've completed somewhere around 25 maybe, and it seems like what I could see online that maybe there's like 60 or 50 quests that are available, and I don't know if those are going to change or if they're going to get added onto or if there's something past that and it's just so early on that people haven't progressed that far, but that's about where I'm at. I have all the maps unlocked. I have quite a few number of codex entries, but I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that will get added to that probably as I go through the back half of the quests. But this is just my initial observations, just from my personal experience playing the game. So, like I said earlier, Rockhound Black, I think, has been doing some lore hunting streams. I'm sure they're way ahead of the curve, and kind of what I'm connecting with here doesn't have to do with any of the Easter egg stuff and kind of like the mazes that I've seen on the map and stuff like that. And I don't know if those are attached to in-game like activities you can do to gain items or if they're attached to, like, the larger story that they're trying to tell. But like what I'm saying is this is just my perspective and my experience with it so far. And before I get into kind of the aspect of the story that I'm interested in and where I think it's going, I do want to kind of explain my approach to this. When I'm talking about a narrative in an extraction shooter, generally what I've found is that it's presented in three ways. So the first is the quests. These are the direct tasks that you're given by the characters in the game. In Tarkov and in Ark, these are the vendors, the traders. In Marathon, it was the corporations that were giving you these tasks. The second way is through environmental storytelling. So obviously, the maps in extraction shooters, kind of like battle royales, are a major set piece. There's a lot to explore. And for example, in Arc Raiders, if you're playing on the Blue Gate map, I believe is what it's called, you can see that there's a huge wreckage with a big giant robot at the end of that. So you can deduce by completing the quest, but also just walking around on the map and seeing that this was the scene of a large battle, or this, Ark fell here and destroyed it. Maybe that was a consequence of some sort of human intervention. And there's a lot of little things like that in extraction games that I think tell kind of micro stories within the larger narrative that they're telling that just gives more context and flavor to the world, while simultaneously sometimes offering some insight that really does progress the larger narrative as well. And then the third way is through the written material. So notes, lore entries, item descriptions. In Arc Raiders, it's called the Codex. This is just a conglomeration of info with little blurbs about different components, so you can come back and like refresh your memory. Hunt Showdown did something similar to this. It may have been removed though. I feel like earlier this year when I got back on Hunt for a little bit, I couldn't find it, but it may have just been that they had changed the menus. But those are kind of the three ways: quests, environmental storytelling, and written material. And that's kind of largely how I approach understanding and kind of cracking open these stories. So with that being said, let's talk about what I think is the general gist of the story so far and thing that's interesting to me. So it seems like the planet that we're on, Earth, I believe. It seems, we're in Italy. There's a lot of themes going towards that region. We're on Earth, and some time ago, Earth had a environmental catastrophe. It seems like everything kind of went haywire for us, seemingly outside of anything having to do with the Ark, the evil robots falling from the sky. So when the Earth kind of collapsed ecologically, it seems like there was this exodus, which is what the spaceport map is all about. It's showing this massive facility where it seems like in response to the Earth failing to be a habitable location, some aspects or some, community of humans got into these massive spaceships and said, all right, we're getting out of here before things get too bad. Then there was the kind of resurgence. I'm forgetting the name here. Maybe I'll put them on the screen so you guys know the names of the eras where people came back, up to the ground and realized, okay, maybe we can live here. The atmosphere has become more habitable. The damage that we had done to the ecosystem has settled enough by the lack of human presence that now humans can reemerge. And then that's when the Ark started coming in. And now all of a sudden we have a new issue. Not only did we destroy the planet, but now robots are here and they're trying to destroy us. And it hasn't been directly stated in anything that I've found or experienced in the game yet exactly what the Ark are, where they come from. I haven't seen any indication that this is even similar to the types of robotics that humans were potentially working on prior to the collapse of the planet and when everybody left in the spaceship. So it really gives this vibe that these things are entirely not understood. And even the traders that we talk to who have experience, like Celeste, for example, talks about being in a battle topside. And she even doesn't really seem to have a ton of insight into any possible origin or reason for the Ark being here and what's largely going on. Everybody seems basically lost in the sauce about them. And so my initial kind of thought, probably because of my science fiction obsession, was, okay, maybe the thing that they're building up to here is that the Arks are alien. Maybe this will give way to later events where a larger alien invasion will come from the sky in later seasons or additional content. And maybe you'll be fighting these kind of large, almost like boss battle type things against UFOs, or getting abducted by an Ark maybe is just like a fantasy of mine that I think would be hilarious to get sucked up into the sky like a cow. I've kind of moved away from that just on their presentation and how similar they are to a lot of the technology that we are seeing on Earth that we know are, human built structures. Although that's not something that's been directly stated, there's a level of, visual similarity between the Arks and the technology that we're experiencing, on the human end of things. So like I said, first thought was aliens. Then when we got the spaceport map unlocked and I watched that cutscene, that's when it started to trigger something. I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. That's what I talked about earlier, where we learned that humans had left, after the downfall of the planet. And so now my running theory about where this story may be going, and once again, haven't seen anything hinted at this, but I'm not tapped into the Reddits and the Discords and where everyone, so maybe I'm way behind and this is something people know. But my thinking is that this initial group of humans that left are now trying to return, maybe. Or maybe they've been in orbit the whole time waiting for the planet to stabilize so that they can come back down. Maybe they put themselves into stasis and they gave some sort of artificial intelligence instructions. Hey, wake us when the planet is habitable again. And the kind of thing that they didn't expect was that people would survive on the planet. And so now you have this AI or some sort of autonomous computing structure controlling the Ark, now trying to deal with the issue of, well, the planet's not habitable because there's a bunch of humans down there who destroyed the planet last time. So I think that the interesting twist of this story might be that the origin of the Ark is another faction of humans who are in space or orbiting the planet, and they are either intentionally or unknowingly kind of causing these Ark to come down and hopefully wipe the remaining humans who are alive off the face of the earth so that they can then come back down and resettle. This could be related to maybe they're worried about like viruses, or they've been so disconnected from these people for so long that they don't think their immune system could handle whatever, evolution of bacteria and viral illness that has, happened over the past, I don't know, 100 years, decades. The timeline isn't like super clear on dates. And I think that's something intentional, maybe for them to kind of grow into the story they want to tell later on. But I think maybe that's a reason. Another potential reason could be that the people who left were aristocrats, and the people who were left behind on Earth are kind of lower echelon, lower tier of society. And so they don't want to associate with whatever scum is left raiding and, being a loot goblin down here at the dam or wherever. I think that this story, this specific story, this idea is something that I'm interested in. If the, experience that we're having is the result of some separate human intervention and some separate entity that, maybe isn't necessarily fully aware of our situation or is intentionally trying to do that to us, that is an interesting science fiction story to me. And I hope that they kind of lean into the direction of revealing more of that in the back half of quests that I have to do yet. And maybe even farther down the road, that'll be something that's explored in a different season. But these are the kind of little things that I think are hinting at that potentially being the larger story. And if this is entirely not it, and I've completely missed something that just totally contradicts this theory or idea, please feel free to tell me, because I would love that as well. I do think that this is one of the joys of this genre. I think a lot of people have pointed out that the extraction games allow you to create your own stories and memories, with a very player-driven experience round to round. But I also think that the way you experience the story and your interpretation of that is another component that creates a larger narrative for your own journey with the game and what you thought initially and how it changed over time as you were exposed to more information. So yeah, that's basically my thoughts on the story so far. I'm curious enough to see it out to the end. It's connecting with me a lot more than the stuff that I looked into with the finals that wasn't really my kind of thing for whatever reason. And yeah, I'm curious to see what you guys think, and I'm interested. I'm going to keep going and checking it out. I do think it could peter out. I do think that it could be something that ultimately doesn't pay off, or maybe my interpretation of what's occurring is so far off that, the actual thing that's happening isn't what's interesting me. But I'm curious enough to keep going. And obviously the gameplay and the, playing with friends, the jolly cooperation, which was my last Arc Raiders video. That's mainly what I was talking about. It's still so enjoyable that even entirely disconnected from a narrative experience, it's a very fun game. I will say, as like the final piece, one thing that is making it difficult for me to kind of connect with the story, like I said, I'm still interested, I'm engaged with it. One thing that does make it difficult for me to continue, kind of pushing me back a little bit, is the AI voices. At first, I thought, I don't know where I got this mixed up, but I was under the impression that the AI voices were just the like pings in game where people are saying there's this object here, there's this object there, and they had just done TTS voices to make it easier to add in new arcs or phrases very quickly on the fly. And there's a lot of really great contextual pings, which I think are a huge, awesome like component of the game that makes it much more viable and accessible to a larger group of people. Love that. I don't know, there's a little bit of weirdness about using AI voice for all that. I kind of wish they would have just had someone record it to get that emotional influence into the speaking. But I get why they did it. I understand that component. Now, when it comes to the quests, these are not like contextual. These don't need to be like changed on the fly. These are things that you could have someone sit down and record. And really the amount of words that they're saying is so limited. We're talking about not even a paragraph per quest normally. We're talking about like 2 to 3 sentences maybe. I don't understand why it sounds like, at least to me, and I've been told by multiple people, and from what I can read online, they're using that same AI text to speech for the missions. And I honestly, like I said, in my head, I was under the impression that it was just the in-game pains. Maybe I'm still wrong right now. Everything I read online seems to indicate that the quests are AI voices, and I just was playing through kind of assuming like, all right, it's a little monotone, it's a little flat, like sentence to sentence sounds very similar. There's not inflection in their voices in a way that makes sense. There's a little bit of lack of soul. The pauses are all like pretty similarly length. These things are going off in my head. And I really, for the first, 10, 15 quests prior to talking to people and looking into a little bit more, was just living under the impression that it was like bad voice acting. And not like in a way where I'm judging or, oh, my voice acting would be so much better. Just more so in a way where it's like, I'm willing to meet games where they're at, and if the voice acting bad, that's just a part of the game, and it has its own quality to it. I'm much more forgiving of the idea that a human went in and didn't give a performance that I connected with than I am they entirely eliminated the human from actually delivering those lines, and the robot that they got to replace him didn't do their job good. Because now it's like, well, why'd we do the TTS in the first place? Was it really that financially beneficial and that quicker to develop? I mean, you could have had a voice actor read through all of these quests in one day. And like I said, I'm fine with the text-to-speech stuff inside the match. And maybe someone will enlighten me in the comments and say the quests are voice acted, to which I would say they sound really bad. Like, it's weirdly like the one thing in the game that is quality-wise significantly lower than everything else that you experience. And so I I don't know how I feel about that. I kind of wish that they would just bring in voice actors for at least the quest parts, and just have them read it out and give like a full, I don't know, emotional thrust of a human. I still, maybe I'm a boomer. Maybe this is like old man yelling at technology kind of situation, but I wish that they would do that so that I can engage with the quest in a way that feels more real, just a little bit. Like I said, regardless, I'm having a great time with the game. I'm excited to see where the story goes. These are my thoughts on the early narrative and kind of where my head's at with it. And I would love to hear your thoughts, and I'll talk to you guys later. All right, have a good one.